All right.
All yours, Bruce.
Hello, all. This is Bruce Rawles, School for Course in Miracles, and we're going to talk about, is each one to be judged in the end, which is a very short but potent little section in the manual for teachers of the Course in Miracles. So I had fun, as always, collecting thoughts and related ideas, and of course the inevitable quotes from the Course. And I found three that I thought really set the stage for what this section was, I think, trying to say to me and maybe all of us. And so I thought I'd just read these, and you can just let them sink in. I'll put references in the notes later on if you want them, or I can share them. But the first one is, you have no idea of the tremendous release and deep peace that comes from meeting yourself and your brothers totally without judgment. I just really like that. I know I'm not there yet, but I feel like, yeah, we're all making progress toward that, right? And then the next one is, oh, my brothers, if you only knew the peace that will envelop you and hold you safe and pure and lovely in the mind of God, you could but rush to meet him where his altar is. Sort of a cosmic skedaddle, right? Encouraged. And then the third one is, when you are afraid, be still and know that God is real, and you are his beloved Son, in whom he is well pleased. Anyway, any comments or musings or reflections on any of those quotes, or just news updates, thoughts du jour, Chris?
Well, just on that first one, because this happened to me a couple of times, and I've read it in I think the book on Bill Thetford, Don't Forget to Laugh, about how somebody he was kind of estranged to himself, had a falling out years ago, maybe 5 or 10 years ago, and they were both at the same workshop, and then they saw each other trying to sneak out because they were having a huggy feeling session afterward, and neither one of them wanted to get caught in that. And so they're kind of sitting where they can get out real quick, and they run into each other, and they just look at each other, and it's like the whole whatever the fallout was, the ill feelings from before, neither one of them even thought about it. They're just so glad to see each other. And it was your first quote was something like that. Mm-hmm. And I've had that happen with somebody I've had similar, it's like somebody, well, I'll hold them in the light, but I don't want to go up to dinner with them, thing like that, and then you see them, and it just, both of us completely forgot, that we were not talking to each other. We were hopefully not having bad thoughts, but it was just so cool to experience that.
That's perfect. Yes. Thank you, Chris. Yeah. Yes, that's sort of like de-escalation, disarmament thought that says, well, maybe the warfare that I've been, whether we call it that or not, in my mind, isn't working out for me.
Ken did a whole seminar on, I don't even know the title of it. If you only knew, if you only knew how much peace you could have without judgment, if you only knew you were the Son of God. And he took all those kind of phrases and put them together in a seminar. Does anybody know the title of that seminar?
I'm gonna look for
this is for Javiera's list. I know she's writing this down furiously as I mentioned it. But yeah, I'll try to find it before the end of class. If you only knew.
That sounds good.
How cool it's going to be when you get there. Yeah.
That sounds excellent. Yeah. Well, I thought, I was reading today's workbook lesson. I thought, this whole section that we're going to read, it's only 3 paragraphs in the manual, is about sinlessness. And I thought, well, there's so many words that are equivalent. So I thought, I'd like to read lesson 38, which is today's workbook lesson, and just swap out wherever we see the word holiness with sinlessness. So I'm going to read the first paragraphs. If you want to go to lesson 38, there's nothing my holiness cannot do in the workbook. I'm going to read the first paragraph and then maybe get a volunteer for, let's see, just the first three paragraphs. I'll just read the first one and get a couple of volunteers for 2 and 3. And I'm just going to replace the word holiness with sinlessness. And I think there's a lot of places where that can be helpful to just realize the equivalence of so many of the ideas in the course that are right-minded. And then, of course, the equivalence of the crazy ideas too. And just noticing that. So is everybody there yet? All good? Okay. So lesson 38, there's nothing my sinlessness cannot do. Your sinlessness reverses all the laws of the world. It is beyond every restriction of time, space, distance, and limits of any kind. Your sinlessness is totally unlimited in its power because it establishes you as the Son of God, at one with the mind of his creator. Any volunteers for paragraph 2 with a little substitution exercise? Looks like Abby's reaching.
Yeah.
Go for it, Abby. Thanks.
And I see Lynn wants the next paragraph.
Okay, we're good. We're good.
Through your sinlessness, the power of God is made manifest. Through your sinlessness, the power of God is made available. And there is nothing the power of God cannot do. Your sinlessness then can remove all pain, can end all sorrow, and can solve all problems. It can do so in connection with yourself and with anyone else. It is equal in its power to help anyone because it is equal in its power to save anyone. Gee, that really sounds like there's no hierarchy of illusions.
Yeah.
I like sinlessness, and I also like innocence. It could do either sinlessness or your innocence.
I have actually a long list that I was going to, well, not too long a list, but of sort of equivalents that I was going to get to in a moment.
Good.
But yeah, I completely agree. So Lynn Altman, would you like to read the third paragraph? And then after that, we can just close our eyes and take a few moments and let it sink in.
Sure. If you are sinless, so is everything God created. You are sinless because all things he created are sinless. And all things he created are sinless because you are. In today's exercises, we will apply the power of your sinlessness to all problems, difficulties, or suffering in any form that you happen to think of, in yourself or in someone else. We will make no distinctions because there are no distinctions.
Okay, let's gently return to sinlessness without distinctions. Thanks.
A while back, Stephen did a class on lavender, if you remember that the color of heaven is lavender. So another title for this is there is nothing my lavender cannot do.
There we go. There we go. If it's all the same, any word will do.
Oh, the other thing, it's called, this is Javiera, it's called Jesus Promise. Jesus Promise, if you but knew. Jesus Promise. And he goes through a whole series of how holy we are, and if we only knew it, we'd be fine.
Yeah. I'm gonna look for that one too.
Jesus Promise.
I'm writing that down. Thank you. So yeah, as promised, in addition to replacing holiness with sinlessness, I just made a kind of a quick list. Holiness equals sinlessness equals innocence equals benevolence equals kindness. And then I just did an unabashed romp through the characteristics in the development of trust. Equals trust, equals honesty, equals tolerance, equals gentleness, joy, equals defenselessness, equals generosity, equals patience, equals faithfulness, equals open-mindedness. And then I've got an ellipsis for the dot, dot, dot for it's probably a whole lot of other words, and whatever brings a feeling of peace to your mind is to be a suitable equivalent, right? Anybody have a suggestion or two besides lavender? Which is good. I like lavender, it's a nice color. Okay, well, we can go back to that if someone, if a word just jumps out at someone.
I just thought of, there's nothing my Jesus cannot do. I sound like a fundamentalist.
There you go.
There's nothing my Jesus cannot do.
There we go. So before, yeah, really, that's so true. And there's nothing, any of us aligned with that, that mind can't do, right? So, before we read the section 15, I just wrote down a few words because I was thinking about, well, what is this really telling us? I mean, the usual religious baggage, undue task, it would seem, is taking the idea that God is going to judge us, and the Course takes that, turns it on its head upside down, and says, no, God's never judged anyone. And we need to stop judging God by the mechanism, since it's an indirect course, of not judging each other. And that's, to me, the whole emphasis of the Course. And if I can just look at all the ways that I fight against holiness, sinlessness, innocence, benevolence, kindness, trust, honesty, and so forth, by condemning even just the slightest little, oh, this person's different and that difference is important. Each one of those little niggling, silly, forgivable things becomes an opportunity for me to be a little more peaceful, if I can just catch them moment to moment. So I just wrote a little mini essay here. As usual, we as egos have everything backwards, upside down, and inside out. We think that egos, God, is going to judge us unfairly or just as bad with the same end result, fairly if we think we're miserable sinners, and we're terrified of that condemnation. Of course, the only one doing any condemning is our dualistic dreaming minds. And fortunately, the happy ending that thwarts and aborts ego's dystopian film noir ending, we will all ultimately decide against our own condemnation, seeing no value in that approach. We're all just going to say, this condemning thing isn't working. I got to stop this. I got to use new hard stop it therapy on my condemnation. We'll see it is just silly, ineffective, and easily dismissed. At the end, at the top of the ladder, so to speak. So we'll get little glimpses of the silliness, I guess, as we go along, right? So, meanwhile, we need to look at our day-to-day condemnations and a gazillion tiny little paper-cut condemnations, from the most trivial irritations to our, quote, sacred cow, big deal grievances that in no way we're going to let go of. Ego won't let go of victimhood and martyrdom until we pry those thoughts from its cold, dead, non-existent mind. It maintains those self-condemning and self-deprecating thoughts by projecting them onto any convenient target, 24/7, 365, until we decide we've had enough of the silliness of judgment and condemnation, and just making differences real. So anyway, I thought, well, that was kind of my kind of take home quick summary, but I'm sure we'll have a lot of other insights as we go through this. Any volunteers to read the first paragraph in section 15 of the manual? I should probably go there and get a page number since I'm looking at the online version. Anybody have a page number for that?
38.
38. Thank you. Speedy. So page 38, section 15 of the manual is each one to be judged in the end. Who would like to read the first paragraph? Or who wouldn't like
I
to
think
read it?
Lisa wanted to read it. and
Yeah, I
make a lot
think
of
we already
comments
confirmed
about
that
it, I
Lisa
think, as I
might want to.
recall. But I wasn't sure.
You have full authorization to not read.
You want me to read?
Special dispensation. No, oh no, Lisa Roberts. She was coming.
Okay.
It was a joke on earlier.
I thought Lisa would. I thought you said Lisa.
Oh, well, your names sound too much alike unless I mention
I know, right?
carefully.
Oh, okay. I'll
So
read.
do you, Lisa, want to read?
I do not want to deprive Lisa.
Thanks, Lisa.
You're welcome, Lisa.
Killing me. Okay. Is each one to be judged in the end? Well, that's a good question. Indeed, yes. No one can escape God's final judgment. Who could flee forever from the truth? But the final judgment will not come until it is no longer associated with fear. One day, each one will welcome it, and on that very day, it will be given him. He will hear his sinlessness proclaimed around and around the world, setting it free as God's final judgment on him is received. This is the judgment in which salvation lies. This is the judgment that will set him free. This is the judgment in which all things are freed with him. Time pauses as eternity comes near and silence lies across the world that everyone may hear this judgment of the Son of God. Holy are you, eternal, free and whole, at peace forever in the heart of God. Where is the world and where is sorrow now? Wow. I just love line 10. I think that is so poetic. Time pauses as eternity comes near and silence lies across the world. That is just so poetic. And, Bruce, when you selected this, I probably read this at one time or another, and I never really kind of connected the dots about being judged in the end. And to be honest, I don't know if I fully understand God's final judgment. And I was online looking it up to try to find more information because these 3 paragraphs really don't explain a lot. And then I was reading, section 14, how will the world end, which kind of gave me a little bit of information. But it didn't really personalize it to pertain to page 38 as to how each one of us will be judged in the end. I think Western Christianity has taught us that the final judgment is usually very harsh. I grew up Catholic, so I knew I was probably going to purgatory. And before I went to heaven, if I went to heaven at all. And so, like you said, Bruce, the Course turns that upside down. And now, the Course is saying, know that the final judgment is when, as Ken says, we will go poof, but not before we go peace. So, the final judgment is when we go back and we are all one with God. I think that's what the Course is telling us. But you're going to tell us by the end of this class tonight, I'm sure. So thank you, Bruce. I'm glad you're doing it tonight.
I'm just as clueless, but what I do think is being said as I was reading this, a few times, it's like, well, what if we got it all wrong? What if God's final judgment is like, you're all off the hook, nothing happened, the innocence hasn't been damaged. None of you are damaged goods. You're all part of this one beautiful, amazing, outstandingly beyond comparisons and words and dualistic descriptions, fabulously wonderful, loving, brilliant. pick any string of adjectives that feels great thing, and we're all this one thing. And we're all off the hook because there never was even a hook, vaudeville or otherwise, to yank us off the stage that we thought we were on. So I just really kind of clicked from it. It's like, I just need to stop judging. It's not about God's final judgment, because God's final judgment can only be one of everyone is 100% innocent. Everyone is 100% free and off the hook for anything that we thought or dreamt we did. Suzanne?
Hi, everybody. Yes, thank you. So I also grew up Catholic, and it's a real chuckle now and all that stuff. But when I see the term "will set you free," that was my big breadcrumb. When I heard the term "the truth shall set you free," I wanted to know what that was. I didn't know why everyone wasn't clamoring to find out what is that truth that will set us free. So if you tell this to any Catholic, this is the truth that will set you free from all the ways that we were raised into thinking we were guilty out of the gate, and oh my goodness, and trying to win back the love of God and things like that. So this is true freedom, mental freedom. And on judgment, I came across a great quote from the book, and I read it probably 5 times, and it finally sunk in. And it was, "When you cease judgment, you awaken." There's one little sentence, and I'm really hanging on to that one. So thank you.
Thank you. Maurice?
Yes, I think it's so interesting the way this is phrased. And we think of the last judgment, after everybody in the world dies, all this time, and I'm thinking, I know it seems like it's gonna take me all my life to forgive myself. That's what I constantly catch myself having to do now, it's forgiving myself. And it's gonna, I hope it doesn't take me as long as this, indicates, in the Bible, my whole life and whatever, to forgive myself. But I was listening to Kate Greaves today, and she's a very beautiful, as everybody knows that's listened to her, very, very loving person. And the image that she gave me that helped me a lot today, she says, whoever you're working with, yourself or other people, take them by their face like this, hold their face like this, and tell them, I love you. But she says there's something about imagining physically holding their face, and that really, it does work for me. And so I'm going to have to do that in the mirror more often. Thank you.
Sounds good. I like it. Yeah, I mean, how could the assessment of our Creator be anything other than complete and total acceptance if it's a non-dual reality that we're returning to? I mean, we got a lot of other crazy ideas that seem to conflict with that, but those, I think, all come out in the wash. Lynn?
Yeah, the line that really struck me was the 4th one. The final judgment will not come until it's no longer associated with fear.
Mm-hmm.
And it made me immediately think of how often I use fear of others, fear of outside, events, to justify my judgments of myself and of everything that's going on. And the process of forgiveness is gradually learning that that fear that I'm so attached to is hurting me. And as I learn to let it go, I do experience that relief that those passages, that you read earlier on. But then I go to line 12, where is the world and where is sorrow now? And that's why I don't want to stop using fear to, make all my judgments, because I don't know what that means to have no world and to have no sorrow. It leaves me, I'm having enough experience of holy instance to be trusting that that's the direction I want to be heading in, regardless of my resistance and fear. But at the same time, that's really the trade-off. It's like, yeah, I don't want to suffer, but do I really want to not have somebody to blame for my suffering? Really? Is that, yeah. So really just sitting with that. And I'm so aware that it's only by becoming aware of the pain that I feel by holding on to my fear and judgment, that's coming to be so uncomfortable and so not worth it, that it's like I'm dipping my toe into, the abstract more and more every day. So thanks.
Thank you. As you were talking about blame, I play with words way too much, but I was quickly going to a favorite Sgt. Pepper's lyric. And I was thinking the Ego's version of one of those songs would be, could it be anybody? I just need someone to blame. But that's kind of how egos work. As long as there's, any convenient target that becomes the recipient of my projected blame, it's like, that'll work. Now I'm off the hook. But yeah, I like what you said about how, where's the world, where is sorrow? Because it's kind of a package deal. Now, the ego's world, of course, is the one that's on the way out. But there's the real world is really what's waiting in the wings as we forgive. And I think when we get more and more glimpses of that, that becomes the new foundation. And then we're a little less fearful about, it's not like I'm really giving up anything. We're really just giving up misery. We're giving up sorrow. And I think that's an interesting juxtaposition in that last line, because it's the ego's world and sorrow are essentially synonymous, aren't they? Yeah.
When I was picking a picture for the post today, there's the classic ones, God the Father and Judgment Day and paintings by Michelangelo. But then there was I think the one I chose was a Mormon one, where Jesus is standing there and he's inviting seemingly everybody, all the families. But that's a crop picture, because just to the right, what was left out was all the people that were going to hell. So I just included all the good guys. So, but it's almost like, number 14, number 15, Jesus is really doing a bait and switch here, because he knows, sin, guilt, fear. Fear is in the future. It's punishment. We're all going to die. How will the world end? In a fiery furnace. How is each one to be judged in the end? Yeah, the chaff from the wheat and all that. It's so tied up with our ego ideas about time. And then what I've never done before, and what I started doing with last week and with this particular thing, is what Stephen did. I never thought of doing before, but it made so much sense. He said, how will the world end? Well, it's already ended. There is no world. And so is each one to be judged in the end? It's already over. We're already judged as innocent. That's really the answer to line 4. But the final judgment will come to me when I don't associate it with fear anymore. When I stop holding on to this timeline of sin, guilt, and fear, and that's my identity, then the final judgment, which has already happened, that we're all already okay, I'll be aware of it. It'll come to me when I no longer associate it with fear. It's like, oh, that just pulls the rug on all kinds of, like, oh my God, am I going to be one of the chaff or the wheat, or or whatever the phrase is. Yeah. Oh, and then I was trying to imagine one of my favorite political bad guys, like holding their face in my hands, going, "I love you." It was tough, but I know the degree of toughness in doing that was how much I'm still holding on to the timeline. That I think people should be punished because some people are even worse than other people. Yeah. Yeah, it's good. Thanks.
Thank you. We're all wheat here. No, there's no chaff. Interestingly enough, when you mentioned the picture you used in the email, I also had a thought too, and it was this one. So I didn't have time to doctor it up in Photoshop, but I kind of like the idea to get out of jail free card. So anyway, that was my candidate, but I was going to Photoshop it, but I didn't make the time today for that. So anyway, but yeah, we get, because I think Holy Spirit is basically the intermediary that says God doesn't even know about courtrooms and sentences and judgments, and God only knows wheat. Just one solid field of wheat. There's no chaff at all.
We're all Wheaties. Have your Wheaties.
We're all Wheaties. Exactly.
What if you're gluten intolerant?
Well, okay, then
you're going to hell.
Whatever the equivalent is. That's good. Well, metaphors do break down in dualistic language. Yeah, okay, let's see. Anyone for? Oh, we had another volunteer for the second paragraph, didn't we? Or Lisa has a comment. You're muted.
I was going to volunteer to read, but if you already have one, never mind.
Well, I think you already did, right?
Did I? Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. Sure, I do.
Okay.
Is this your judgment on yourself, teacher of God? Do you believe that this is wholly true? No, not yet, not yet. But this is still your goal, why you are here. It is your function to prepare yourself to hear this judgment and to recognize that it is true. One instant of complete belief in this, and you will go beyond belief to certainty. One instant out of time can bring time's end. Judge not, for you but judge yourself, and thus delay this final judgment. What is your judgment of the world, teacher of God? Have you yet learned to stand aside and hear the voice of judgment in yourself? Or do you still attempt to take his role from him? From him. Learn to be quiet, for his voice is heard in stillness. And his judgment comes to all who stand aside in quiet listening and wait for him. Yeah, I was listening to that Ken Wapnick workshop on pathways to forgiveness, and he was describing the whole descent into the body and the ego and everything. And it was like, I've heard this myth before, but it was just the way he was describing it, and this thing was so real. It's like, I could never get out of this by myself. I don't know how we could do this otherwise. So I certainly believe that my judgment against myself hurts somebody else, because if I'm judging myself, I'm judging others and vice versa. So I just have to step aside. But to do that is a process. So anyway, I'm game. Thanks.
Thank you, Lisa. Lisa.
Bruce, there's on page 33 in the text, the meaning of the last judgment. There's a section called the meaning of the last judgment, which really, I think, helps to explain these 2 pages, these 3 paragraphs of what it is. The last judgment is one of the most threatening ideas, is what it says. It's generally undertaken, or it's generally thought of as a procedure undertaken by God The first step towards freedom involves sorting out from false from true. And then it goes on to explain what the last judgment is. I think that's really helpful for anybody who wants additional information.
Yep.
On page 33 in the text.
Yeah, great suggestion. I just looking at that second paragraph that you read a little bit of, the third sentence in the second paragraph, judgment is not an attribute of God. That right there should clarify a lot. It does for me. And I was thinking about how this paragraph that was just read reiterates the idea that God doesn't judge. There's nothing to judge in pure non-duality, right? In perfect oneness. So how could something that cannot be divided against itself or in any way have anything to judge, let alone the capacity for that? But where we're at, we think everything is about judging, and we value judgment. And the Course asks us, to question every value that we hold, because those values usually are about our judgments, it would seem. So once again, it's like, well, okay, God isn't doing the judging, I'm doing the judging. And when I stop judging, which I think condemning is actually, for me, is kind of a more helpful word, because judging, you could kind of judge as something as neutral or whatever, but condemning usually implies something is not good, and it could be a special love as well as a special hate. That could be a condemnation, because if I'm condemning someone to live up to an expectation, that's a condemnation just as much as thinking that someone is horrific or whatever. So anyway, any other thoughts on that second paragraph?
Me. Well, I was reading, I was reading the third one, which really caught my eye. If I can just read a few lines.
Oh, sure, please do.
Judgment is generally thought of as a procedure undertaken by God. Actually, it will be undertaken by my brothers with my help. It is final healing rather than a meting out of punishment, however much you may think that punishment is deserved. Punishment is a concept totally opposed to right-mindedness, and the aim of the last judgment is to restore right-mindedness to you. So I really like this section, because when I first read page 38 and 39, I felt like I couldn't put the pieces together, but now having read this, it makes perfect sense, especially when I then read paragraph 5, and where it goes on to say that the last judgment is frightening, not only because it has been projected onto God, but also because of the association of the word last, in quotes, with death. So this is, if anyone else is interested, this is really a great reference.
That is so helpful, Lisa. Thank you. Yeah, I really probably this would have been at least as good as anything else we could have done to clarify that section of the manual. So yeah, just skimming it is like, yeah, this is just so right on and so pertinent. Very much so. Yeah, thanks.
Going back to what you were saying about condemnation, traditionally the last judgment sounds bad enough, but the last condemnation is like, oh my God, I'm going to hell for sure. The last condemnation. That makes it even worse.
I just figure anytime if I can catch myself even just making a comparison where I realize I'm not peaceful making that comparison, it's like, well, that's a condemning thought. What's not love is murder. It's like, okay. I don't really totally get that, but if I'm willing to consider that if I'm not completely peaceful, I'm still harboring some kind of a murderous thought system, and I'm condemning. I'm drawing a big red X on whatever it is that I think is not good enough or whatever. Lynn?
Yeah, it just struck me that of course I'm going to be condemning all the time because I hate myself. I'm condemning myself 24/7, 365 days a year. How can I not condemn everything else as well? I mean, it's just, I don't know. I mean, it's just sort of, it's ludicrous to think that we can somehow or other escape from thinking of ourselves as sinful in any way, think of ourselves as guilty in any way, and think that we're ever going to experience anything but that punishment on down there, because we're punishing ourselves every single minute of every single day when we're not walking with the Holy Spirit or Jesus. I mean, I just have to really acknowledge that. So the depth, the murderousness is really, how I feel about myself. And that's that intolerable thing that Jesus talks about all the time. And I have to throw that out. It has to be God who's murderous, or it has to be somebody, political figure out there, or some tyrant somewhere that's murderous. Can't be me, because I don't know where to go with that. What Lisa was saying, there's no way we can get out of it. The depth of our belief in having killed off God, destroyed heaven, is just, there are no words.
It's immense. We made up a whole universe to try to avoid the unconscious, unfounded guilt that the ego is the only thought the ego knows. Yeah.
Right. And
it's staggering, isn't it?
Completely made up. That's the piece.
Yeah.
It's like, rather than getting all wrought up over it, just like, oh my goodness, none of it's real.
Exactly. I think the beauty and the silver lining is the Holy Spirit keeps saying, every single moment becomes an opportunity to look at the judgment, look at the condemnation, and say, what if you just question it? What if you just question the validity of those judgments and those condemning thoughts and those the self-hatred, like you were saying? That what if I were to say, well, what if that's inaccurate? And I keep coming back to one of those things that really stuck me a few years ago when I was listening. It stuck with me when I was listening to some of Ken's stuff, and he said the ego is not evil, sinful, or wicked. It's just silly. It's completely forgivable because it's just a correctable mistake. It's something that can easily be undone with the Holy Spirit's help. Like you're saying, on our own, we're lost, we're gone. Because on our own, all we have is that whether it's mostly unconscious or not, is that self-hatred, because we think we blew up perfect oneness. We think we threw God under the bus and did all those metaphors, but it didn't happen. In truth, on the level of form, we got tons of evidence that on any street corner, you ask anybody, are you separate from me? Well, of course. But then we have little glimmers here and there of reminders that we're all in it together, and the shared interest, and just the little bits of kindness kind of remind us that maybe there is another way of looking at things. Yeah. Tim, you look like you have something you want to say.
Oh, I was just wondering if Javiera has any comments, questions about the last judgment.
No, I was just thinking about the idea of judgment. Is a good distinction what Bruce said about condemnation, because I thought, oh, this is a great class, fantastic, but that I'm judging in a positive way, but I'm judging. So it's, yeah. And
Okay.
sorry, but I have to go soon. Don't judge me.
Well, there's replays.
Yeah, I will. I have to go.
And we won't judge you. All wheat here. This is an all wheat classroom. Thanks. So should we read some more of what Lisa found, which is a gold mine, page 33, or should we just, why don't we finish the section 15 in the manual? Maybe we can read a little more of that. I also found another section that I thought was pertinent too, but I'm kind of tending to lean toward reading the whole, all 5 paragraphs of the meaning of the last judgment. Anyone up for the 3rd paragraph in the section 15 in the manual? Abe? Thanks.
You who are sometimes sad and sometimes angry, who sometimes feel your just due is not given you, and your best efforts meet with a lack of appreciation and even contempt, give up these foolish thoughts. They are too small and meaningless to occupy your holy mind an instant longer. God's judgment waits for you to set you free. What can the world hold out to you, regardless of your judgments on its gifts, that you would rather have? You will be judged, and judged in fairness and in honesty. There is no deceit in God. His promises are sure. Only remember that. His promises have guaranteed his judgment, and his alone will be accepted in the end. It is your function to make that end be soon. It is your function to hold it in your heart and offer it to all the world to keep it safe. If only I would buy into this message, I'd be home, right? I mean, it's a beautiful, poetic paragraph, and there's a part of me that believes that, but there's a strong part of me that says, no, something's going to happen, you're going to screw it up, and you're going to end up somewhere else. So, yeah, working on it.
So what if we could all see the final report card, straight A, summa cum laude, and we all get, graduation with honors in
Right.
the course curriculum, and realize we already passed, but now we're just kind of watching the replay of getting rid of the last little residual resistance of, however many days, years, lifetimes, whatever it takes to undo that belief. Huh?
Yeah, I was thinking earlier in the discussion about when we were talking about judging as a filtering action. There's somebody out there that's filtering the wheat from the chaff,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm beginning to realize that usually when you have a filter, you have a membrane that has pores in it, right? And the spores are meant to be small to only let certain things pass.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the filtering that has happened in the last judgment has this infinitely sized hole where everything goes through. So nothing gets rejected, and that is good. I am beginning, when I can think of it in those terms, I begin to relax a bit. But the word "last judgment" still has a lot of baggage. That
Oh yeah.
yeah.
I think for all of us, even
right.
if you weren't brought up Catholic, even if you
yeah.
were probably Aboriginal and knew nothing of any kind of religion, there's still just that intrinsic existential. I think I'm separate from everything else,
Right.
and my senses tell that, blast that into my awareness, 24/7, unless I pause for a moment and say, what if there's another way of thinking of this? Yeah. It's helpful. Yeah, I think just thinking that we're not there, being, I think, honest with our assessment and realizing that we need help is hugely helpful. But also the help that we get, I think, often takes the form of reminding us that where we're headed is to a place in the mind that realizes that the innocence and the sinlessness and the kindness and all those things, all those attributes, the holiness has never gone anywhere. And like you say, that infinitely large filter hole never excluded anyone. Where would it filter to and from in non-duality? I like non-duality. It seems like it answers a bunch of things if I really think about it. Okay. Any more on that third paragraph?
The line that jumped out at me was, and going back to the filtering thing, God's judgment waits for me to set me free from all that job of having to filter all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when you were talking about film noir, right? I was thinking about, like the classic film noir, it's black and white. So everything's either good or bad. And then you got like this somewhat sarcastic, cynical detective or private investigator telling the story, I'm the private investigator and I'm telling this story sort of from a sarcastic point of view. I'm deciding what's black and what's white, who the bad guys are, and I'm going to figure it out. I mean, all that filtering I got to figure out. It sets me free from having to have this film noir story where I'm the private investigator.
And ultimately, we're both the culprit and the perpetrator.
yeah, right.
Oops.
It's like
that's right.
It's like a DiCaprio movie when you realize Shutter Island, when you realize you're the bad guy.
Yeah, that's right. For sure. Well, how about I had another whole section in mind with the means and end, but I really like what Lisa found. I'd like to take the next whatever time we have remaining and read that in more detail, because I just skimming it, I saw so many gems and they fit so nicely. It starts on page 33 in the text, which is chapter 2, section 8. The meaning of the last judgment. How about I'll read the first paragraph and then get it. One of the ways in which you can correct the magic miracle confusion is to remember that you did not create yourself. So I'm just going to add a little quick commentary. Okay, if God created us sinless and holy, then that judgment's done. We can forget about that. And the only judgment we need to worry about is the stuff that we keep rehashing out of nothingness and keep trying to foist upon ourselves and everyone else. You are apt to forget this when you become egocentric, and this puts you in a position where a belief in magic is virtually inevitable. Your will to create was given you by your creator, who is expressing the same will in his creation. Since creative ability rests in the mind, everything you create is necessarily a matter of will. It also follows that whatever you alone make is real in your own sight, though not in the mind of God. This basic distinction leads directly into the real meaning of the last judgment. So we just need to unjudge by learning to question every value that we hold and all the stuff that we made up. Not in any condemning way, but just like, what if that's not real? Any other comments on that paragraph? And thanks again, Lisa, for it is so right on. Okay, anyone to read paragraph 2? Who hasn't read it? Might like to read. Rebecca, thank you.
Hey there. Okay. The last judgment is one of the most threatening ideas in your thinking. This is because you do not understand it. Judgment is not an attribute of God. It was brought into being only after the separation, when it became one of the many learning devices to be built into the overall plan. Just as the separation occurred over millions of years, the last judgment will extend over a similarly long period, and perhaps an even longer one. Its length can, however, be greatly shortened by miracles, the device for shortening but not abolishing time. If a sufficient number become truly miracle-minded, the shortening process can be virtually immeasurable. It is essential, however, that you free yourself from fear quickly, because you must emerge from the conflict if you are to bring peace to other minds. So I was thinking about the last judgment, like, and how before we come to the course, it's so interesting that not only are you already dead, but then you're going to be judged after you're dead. Like it's a horrible thing. Like you've already suffered enough dead, and God's gonna kill you again. Like how
Insult to injury, huh?
like it's just really awful. So thank goodness that's not real.
Yeah.
And you know, I love remembering that miracles shorten time. And I'm reminded of the you know, Madeleine L'Engle, who did all the Wrinkle in Time books. She did Wrinkle in Time, Wind at the Door, and she talks about this thing called a tesseract, which is essentially a shrinking, and she goes in, they're children's books, but it's a shrinking of time so that you can jump from one time to another. But it literally is a miracle she's describing. And I never realized that until I just thought about this right now. And, you know, I'm taking liberty there, but that trilogy is amazing. And her whole thing is about, they shorten time, they save time to get back home. So I love that. Yeah,
that could be a real relief when we read this thing about perhaps multiple millions of years. That sounds a little dreary. And it's like, yeah, okay, I think I got the Sisyphus myth, you know, theory down, but it's like millions. I kind of like to shorten that up a little bit.
Right, and then he says, like, you know, the thing that keeps you in time is fear. Yeah. Well, one of the things. I mean, a lot of things keep us in time, but if we can escape from our fear, or if we can remember that our fear isn't real and that our fear is the thing that's keeping us in the hamster wheel that is time, that's the free up point.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's where we do those little tesseract jumps of it's like, okay, if I can be peaceful now, I could then extend that and keep extending that and extending that. And then even if those initially seem like little islands that are separated, you know, the more we have those moments of forgiveness and suspension of condemnation, the more we realize, well, I could actually do this more frequently. And then it kind of, you know, builds on itself. And then the acceleration happens. You know, we're shortening, but not abolishing time.
So I was curious why you think, you know, he's talking about miracle readiness, he's talking about fear, and then he launches into this, was Helen having a bad day? Like, why would you just go from talking about fear kind of and miracle readiness to last judgment? Let's just go for broke here. Let's talk about the worst thing possible.
Maybe Helen was nodding off and Jesus needed something to get her attention. I don't know. I have no idea. But that's a funny thought. I don't know.
I know for myself, I think I use the excuse of punishment as a reason to not do things. And so maybe I'm just I don't know. It doesn't matter. I'm just thinking like, this fear of miracles, you know, the fear of everything. So it's like he had to jump into this idea of our ultimate fear, which is to be punished continually, and remind us that it's not real in order to remember that it's safe to be miracle minded.
Yeah. And as you're saying that, Rebecca, I was thinking the irony is that when we believe in separation, when we adhere to the ego thought system, we're basically punishing ourselves continuously. Like everything else, we got to bass backwards. We forget that, you know, if God doesn't judge, then we're freeing ourselves from God's judgment by freeing ourselves from our own judgment. And then we get to the point where we realize, well, there wasn't any judgment at all. We just made the whole thing up. It was completely self-fabricated. Suzanne?
Oh yeah, exactly. And as I think he wanted to knock it out early here in the book because it's such a fundamental source of fear. Like, let's get that out of the gate, and you can continue reading 2,000 pages and not worry so much.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, one of the other ideas in the course that I remember reading for the first time a few decades ago, it was about, you know, the inevitability of peace, and that how, you know, the word inevitable is which kind of ties into the last judgment and how the world and all that. You know, the word inevitable is fearful to the ego, but a joyous idea to the Holy Spirit. Because the inevitability is, the world will end in joy because it was made out of pain and sorrow. It will end in laughter because it was made out of tears and that forth.
Yes, and in the Catholic Church, it was always judge lest ye be judged. Not knowing the real definition of that was you're judging yourself.
Yeah.
Not the big guy. Yeah.
We just keep turning it around with the tip of the hat to Byron Katie, right? It's not about, it's never upset for the reason I think. It's not about anybody out there. And also, the judgment never happened. The condemnation that I thought I set in motion never happened. It's just a silly misunderstanding that can be corrected. Should we get another volunteer for paragraph 3? Who hasn't read that would like to? Or who would like to read again? Either way. Suzanne.
The last judgment is generally thought of as a procedure undertaken by God. Actually, it will be undertaken by my brothers with my help. It is a final healing rather than a meting out of punishment. However much you may think that punishment is deserved, punishment is a concept totally opposed to right-mindedness. And the aim of the last judgment is to restore right-mindedness to you. The last judgment might be called a process of right evaluation. It simply means that everyone will finally come to understand what is worthy and what is not. After this, the ability to choose can be directed rationally. Until this distinction is made, however, the vacillations between free and imprisoned cannot but continue. All those double negatives. I always freak me out.
I think it's the vacillations between free and imprisoned will
cannot but
continue. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So because we think we have an imprisoned will, but that's only because we chose an imprisoning thought system. It's like, oh, I'm doing this to myself. The secret of salvation. I'm doing this to myself. Yeah.
Exactly. I think this is like the lights just going on of taking this concept that we have an idea of, whether we're raised with it or otherwise, and really turning it on its head. So to be so freeing.
Yeah. The sentence 4 jumped out at me. The punishment is a concept totally opposed to right-mindedness. And the aim of the last judgment is to restore right-mindedness to you. So right-mindedness would be like, we're innocent, we're sinless, we're holy, we're complete. We didn't shatter any oneness of in any way. It never happened in truth, in eternity.
I know one of my biggest gripes when I'm watching news and I'm in an ego frame of mind is, why aren't they in jail yet? Look at what they've done and they're not in jail yet. Even from the right side, I mean, you could see all the liberal guys that you think should be in jail.
So maybe we could all print ourselves a stack of get out of jail free cards and throw it every time we
hand them out on the elevator. That's good.
All right. Anyone for paragraph 4? Who hasn't read that would like to read? Maurice, thanks.
Okay, can you hear me?
Uh-huh.
The first step toward freedom involves a sorting out of the false from the true. This is a process of separation in the constructive sense and reflects the true meaning of the apocalypse. Everyone will ultimately look upon his own creations and choose to preserve only what is good, just as God himself looked upon what he had created and knew that it was good. At this point, the mind can begin to look with love on its own creations because of their worthiness. At the same time, the mind will inevitably disown its miscreations, which without belief will no longer exist. I was just thinking that sorting out there, like Abe was saying, there's not going to be any of that sorting anymore. It's it's just always over and over comes back that we are, it's going to be us forgiving ourselves ultimately, because it starts out and it continues to always look like we're judging other people, and we still do, but it's really back to me, judging me. So thank you.
Thank you. Sentence 4, the last word, worthiness, jumped out at me, and I was reflecting on Dave and I, Dave Van Dyke and I get together and chat frequently, and he played a song last night that's actually sort of a traditional religious song, but it was just the feeling of the idea of worthiness came through, even though it probably had some specialness in terms of the origin of the religious idea, but I was kind of sort of translating in real time to what the Holy Spirit's idea of worthiness, and it's like, okay, we're all infinitely worthy, and that worthiness could be another synonym to tack on to the holiness and the sinlessness and the innocence. We're all, if we're all infinitely worthy, not the phony self that we made up that we hide behind and we think of as our personas, but the real being that we all are. That's pretty cool. And we're all it. That same thing. Yeah. Anything else on that paragraph?
Lynn and Rebecca.
Oh, thanks. I was staring down the book and was like, I'm not going to catch it. It was got their hand. I'm staring at the book.
Had your head in the book.
I was looking up the Greek derivation of apocalypse, and it translates apo and kaluptian, which means to uncover.
Oh, cool.
Kind of like,
cool.
yeah.
I like it. That's much better than my pun of alpaca lips, which was the kissing llama poster I made years ago. All right, good. Yeah, uncover. That's good.
I was looking at sentence 5. The mind will inevitably disown its miscreations, which without belief will no longer exist.
Mm-hmm.
And thinking about back to there will be no world and no sorrow, that it really is this whole forgiveness thing is a process of really, really acknowledging that what I've made, what I think I've made, really is not worth anything but sorrow. And it's just thinking of those. I don't know that I've ever really attached that word. I mean, I've used miscreations as kind of a general idea, but to think literally that what I'm seeing in the world that's upsetting is simply a miscreation, a mistaken thought in my mind that doesn't exist. It's like the moment I take my attention away from it as something that is valuable to me, it ceases to exist. So the authority and power of my mind is immediate and absolute in that regard. It's, I don't know, it really puts me in touch more with the idea of being a decision-making mind rather than this little person that's trying to put these ideas together and make sense of them. And it feels very, very hopeful and empowering to move into that timelessness. It's really a timeless experience of looking that way at these illusions that seem to have a life of their own, but that are only coming from my imaginings. Thanks.
And boy, what imaginations we have. Evidently. As you were sharing that, I was thinking, just the sophistication of this elaborate holographic 3D high resolution puppet show that we call life, that we take so seriously. And because we're so drilled down, zoomed in, and riveted on the little minutia of the story, and we just need that astronaut's perspective sometimes. Just pull back the camera and say, oh yeah, it's as Bill Murray said, it just doesn't matter that the little stuff that we made up, but what we really are behind the stage, pantomime and play acting is magnificent beyond what we can imagine. Suzanne?
I just think you mentioned the word persona, like our personalities. I quickly looked that up as well because I thought it meant mask, and it does persona in Greek, mask, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's so interesting. Cosmically, we're all walking around literally wearing masks now. I find that fascinating.
Yeah, that's a great helpful concept, isn't it? We're hiding behind something that we made up, and needlessly. One of the things I stumbled on looking through things to share with this topic tonight was this need not be, and there's one section that has a whole bunch of those. This need not be, you know, all the crazy stuff we do to ourselves. This need not be. You know, we don't have to punish ourselves. It's not necessary.
I keep going back to the paragraph 3 where he says, line 3, however much I think that punishment is deserved.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's one miscreation that keeps me locked in to believing all this, it's that there is punishment that is deserved. And I'm willing to burn a little bit in purgatory if the bad guys go to hell, right? Or, you know, if the bad guys go to jail forever, I'm willing to go to jail for a month or two. And then he goes on.
Civic duty.
Yeah, right. However much I think punishment is deserved. Well, that's what my belief, that's the miscreation. I think punishment is deserved. And it's a concept that's totally opposed to right-mindedness. I mean, it's that belief, and that's the judgment. Punishment is deserved. And underneath all that is what I think what Lynn Altman was saying. It proves that I should be condemned eternally too, because look what I did to heaven. I should be punished forever. Punishment is deserved.
Reminds me of that Johnny Clegg and Savuka lyric of we're the prisoners of the prisoners we have taken. I really like that. I think it fits that pretty nicely. Yeah. Let's see. I'll read this last paragraph, and then we can do a little quick closing meditation. The term last judgment is frightening, not only because it has been projected onto God, but also because of the association of last in quotes with death. This is an outstanding example of upside down perception. If the meaning of the last judgment is objectively examined, it is quite apparent that it is really the doorway to life. No one who lives in fear is really alive. Your own last judgment cannot be directed toward yourself because you are not your own creation. You can, however, apply it meaningfully and at any time to everything you have made and retain in your memory only what is creative and good. That's the dreams softly of your sinless brother admonition there, right? This is what your right-mindedness cannot but dictate. The purpose of time is solely to, quote, give you time, in quotes, to achieve this judgment. It is your own perfect judgment of your own perfect creations. When everything you retain is lovable, there is no reason for fear to remain with you. This is your part in the atonement. So we just got to keep us lovable and keep questioning the rest, it sounds like. Any comments on that? Well, I had a whole nother section that I was going to read, but I actually like what Lisa Roberts found much better, and I think that really fits nicely. But if you want, later on, you could check out where is this section? It's the one on means and end in the text. I've got it in here somewhere. The consistency of means and end. It's text chapter 20, section 7. And that I think also fits pretty nicely in there. It talks about sinlessness quite a bit. So if you wanted just something to further the thoughts. So I thought what I'd do for a closing meditation is read lesson 318. And if you want to just get quiet and close your eyes and sit back.
Can I ask, I'm so sorry, really
Oh,
quick.
oh, certainly, of course.
Can you repeat the name of that seminar by Ken that you were telling Javiera about at the beginning of the call?
It's called Jesus, and I assume that, Promise, Promise, and then the subtitle is If You But Knew.
Okay, sorry, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm gonna check that out too. Thanks. That sounds like a good one. Okay, if you want to read along, it's lesson 318, and otherwise you can just sit back and let it sink in. Lesson 318. In me, salvation's means and end are one. In me, God's Holy Son, are reconciled all parts of heaven's plan to save the world. What could conflict when all the parts have but one purpose and one aim? How could there be a single part that stands alone, or one of more or less importance than the rest? I am the means by which God's Son is saved, because salvation's purpose is to find the sinlessness that God has placed in me. I was created as the thing I seek. I am the goal the world is searching for. I am God's Son, his one eternal love. I am salvation's means and end as well. Let me today, my Father, take the role you offer me in your request that I accept atonement for myself. For thus does what is thereby reconciled in me become as surely reconciled to you. So take a moment, let that sink in. Okay, so come back and go forth and see sinless Wheaties everywhere. Thanks all.
Yay.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Bruce.
Bruce. Thanks, everybody.
Peace,
Bye,
everybody.
everybody.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night. See y'all. Good night.